Welcome back to another episode of SmoothBrainEDH, where you make the smoothest plays with the biggest brains. This week, our members decided to get a little sweaty and play some cEDH, so let's see what they brought to the table. Our first player today is Matt on Minsc Timeless Heroes. This deck was designed by Bones and Surreal, and is a mid-range deck, using this commander as a way to pressure life totals and draw cards. Matt keeps a hand with the Forest, Scalding Tarn, Prismatic Vista, Mox Diamond, Veil of Summer, Eldritch Evolution, and Cankerbloom. Up next is Jake on the partner pairing of Thrasios, Triton Hero, and Bruse, Boorish Herder. This deck was designed by Comedian MTG and has a relatively simple game plan: make infinite mana, using Thrasios as an outlet to draw the whole deck. He starts the game with a Command Tower, Waterlogged Grove, Mystic Remora, Chain of Vapor, Silence, Neoform, and Ranger Captain of Eos. There is Jason on Shalai and Hallar. This is actually a brew by Jason, and employs a stacks game plan to slow down opponents before winning with one of many 2-card combos. Jason keeps Marsh Flats, Brushland, Noxus Revival, Time of Need, Allosaurus Shepherd, Dockside Extortionist, and Elesh Norn Grand Cenobite. Last up is Ethan on the partner pairing of Tymna the Weaver and Kraum, Ludovic's Opus. This deck is known as Blue Farm, and this list was designed by Sinestra and Kazu. Ethan's game plan is to leverage the card advantage from his commanders and ad nauseum to assemble a combo win. He keeps a hand with Scalding Tarn, Chrome Mox, Gamble, Imperial Seal, Diabolic Intent, Burgi God of Storytelling, and his London Bolgan is a Tainted Pact. We're about to hop right into the game, but before that, go ahead and give us a like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any of our new content. We post new gameplay videos every week, so you won't miss any of it. Big shout out to our patrons. We really appreciate all the support. Link to our Patreon is in the description, as well as the links to our deck lists, our social media, our podcast channel, and our public Discord server. Our channel is partnered with Dragon Shield, so if you're looking to pick up any new sleeves or Magic-related products, check out our affiliate link in the description. We also partner with the Inked Gaming, so if you're looking to make any custom playmats, check out our affiliate link also in the description. Now, on to the gameplay.
Looks like Matt wins the die roll, and he starts off with a Scalding Tarn, then he'll cast a Mox Diamond, pitching Prismatic Vista. After this, he'll crack his Scalding Tarn for a Taiga. Then he'll cast Skirk Prospector and pass the turn to Jake. Jake plays Command Tower, and then we'll cast Mystic Remora, and then he'll pass to Jason. Jason plays Brushland, and then we'll tap it for a green, taking a damage, and then he'll cast Allosaurus Shepherd, and then the turn is passed to Ethan, who plays a Scalding Tarn, and then he'll immediately feed the fish by casting Chrome Mox, exiling Diabolic Intent. The turn is then passed to Matt, who will play a basic forest as land for turn. Then he'll think about it for a little bit, and he decides to sacrifice his Skirk Prospector so he can get a turn 2 Minsc. The fish is fed, and then Minsc resolves, and Matt gets a 1/1 hamster. The Planeswalker is then immediately upticked to put 3+1/+1 counters on the hamster to make it a big hamster. Matt will then move to combat, and he'll swing at Ethan for 4 because Ethan has ad nauseum in his deck. And after damage goes through, Matt will just pass the turn to Jake, who lets his fish die. Then he'll play Waterlogged Grove as land for turn, then he'll tap for 2, taking a damage, and he'll cast Thrasios. Jake will then move to his end step, where Ethan will crack his Scalding Tarn, and he finds a volcanic island to the battlefield. Then Jake moves to clean up and discards Chain of Vapor. Now on Jason's turn, he'll play and fetch with the Marsh Flats, and he says to everybody he's going to get a Savannah, and if that resolves, they say yes. And so to save time, before he picks up his deck and searches, he puts a Time of Need on the stack. Priority goes around the table, and the tutor resolves, so Jason finds Emil the Blessed to his hand.
Meal.
Danger.
Why get a meal when you could have a snack?
And for some reason, Jason taps his Brushland for a colored mana, so he takes another damage. After this, Jason will move to combat, and he'll swing for 1 at the man who made the hamster. He'll then pass the turn, and Ethan will start his turn off with an Exotic Orchard as land for turn. Then he'll tap for 3 mana to get his turn 2 Tymna. He then passes the turn to Matt, who will start off by thinking for a very long time. Then he'll uptick his Planeswalker again to turn his big hamster into a giant hamster. He'll then move to combat, and 7 damage is pointed at the ad naus player again, who just takes the 7 damage. Post-combat, Matt will cast Cankerbloom, and so now he has a blocker for his Walker, so he'll pass the turn to Jake, who starts his turn off with my favorite multicolored land, Tarnished Citadel. And then he'll tap for 3 and cast Ranger Captain of Eos. And since he used Tarnished Citadel and Waterlogged Grove, he loses a total of 4 life for casting it. The Ranger Captain of Eos has an ETB trigger, and he gets to go find a 1 CMC creature to his hand. He says Esper Sentinel is probably not the best pick here because Jason and Matt are just casting creatures, so instead he finds, Esper Sentinel to his hand, alright. And he'll pass the turn to Jason, who plays the 3rd Scalding Tarn of this game. And just like Matt, he'll immediately fetch with it to search his library for a Taiga to the battlefield. Then after this, with a little help from Convoke, Jason will cast Chord of Calling, X is 1. And you better believe one of the best cards from Modern Horizons 2 hits the battlefield, Esper Centennial. Then after a good shuffle, Jason will pass the turn to Ethan. And Ethan will immediately move to combat and swing Tymna at Jason. Jason doesn't block, so Ethan will gain 2 life, and then post-combat, he'll get to draw 1 and lose 1. Then he plays Mana Confluence as land for turn, then he casts Birgi. After Birgi comes Lotus Petal, triggering the Birgi, and Jason also gets a card off Esper Sentinel. Then, Ethan will use the Birgi mana, Lotus Petal, and Mana Confluence to cast Wheel of Fortune. Jason responds with a Noxious Revival on Chord of Calling, but Jake responds to it with a Mental Misstep. And Matt decides he also wants to exile Elvish Spirit Guide for a green mana, and then the wheel resolves. Ethan discards Gamble and Imperial Seal, Matt discards Eldritch Evolution, Veil of Summer, and Underworld Breach. Jake discards a little more, so I'll let him say it.
Silence, Swords to Plowshares, Spell Snare, Neoform, Eladamri's Call, Esper Sentinel.
And you know what, I'll do the same for Jason.
Alright, so Windswept Heath, Boseiju, Llanowar Elves, Elesh Norn, Dockside, Emil.
And so then everyone draws 7 cards, and I forgot to mention Ethan did have a Birgi trigger, which after the wheel resolves, he'll use to cast Mana Vault, which will trigger her again. And then Ethan will pass the turn. And Matt starts his turn off with a Gaia's Cradle. Then he'll evoke out Endurance by exiling Survival of the Fittest. He'll target himself with its ability, and in response to the evoke trigger, he'll tap Gaia's Cradle for 3 green mana. Then he'll cast Invasion of Ikoria, X is equal to 2. And he does not pay for Esper Sentinel. It resolves, and Jason has to defend the battle. Then he'll find Conspicuous Snoop to the battlefield. After this, he'll downtick Minsc and Boo to sacrifice Boo, and he'll draw 7 cards, and the damage is dealt to Birgi. And because of the Snoop, all of his opponents get to see those cards.
Mana Confluence, a Birds of Paradise, Delayed Blast Fireball,
Alright,
What?
Verdict
Oh, he's revealing
Catacomb.
because of...
Force of Vigor,
interesting.
Command Tower, and a Mana Crypt.
Matt will then cast the Mana Crypt, and there's an LED on the top of his library. Matt will then cast Goblin Recruiter. Priority passes around the table, and there are no responses, so it enters the battlefield, and he finds Kiki Jiki and Torch Courier to the top of his library, and the Courier is at the top. And then he casts the Courier and sacks the Courier, targeting his Snoop, so now Kiki Jiki's on the top, and Snoop has its ability. So he'll activate the Snoop to make a copy of itself that comes in untapped and has haste. He'll then repeat this process till he has a Googleplex of Snoops. They're all tapped except for the last one that comes in, which he will tap to make a copy of Goblin Recruiter. And with its search trigger, he finds Mog Fanatic to the top of his library, so then all he has to do is sacrifice his Googleplex of Snoops and kill all of his opponents. And so that's exactly what he does, but Matt says Ethan gets second place. So yeah, there you go, Matt wins. Alright, I'll be the first to admit that game was way too short, so game 2, get ready, here comes the hands. Matt keeps a Snow-Covered Forest, Boseiju Who Endures, Chrome Mox, Change of Fortune, Elvish Mystic, Tinderwall, and bottoms Lion's Eye Diamond. Jake keeps Mana Confluence, Boseiju Who Endures, Chrome Mox, Wild Growth, An Offer You Can't Refuse, Resculpt, and Eldritch Evolution. Jason keeps Bountiful Promenade, Horizon Canopy, Command Tower, Gemstone Caverns, Survival of the Fittest, Worldly Tutor, and Draenith Magistrate. And Ethan keeps Windswept Heath, Wooded Foothills, Mox Opal, Enlightened Tutor, Imperial Seal, and he bottoms Otawara and Grand Abolisher. Alright, that's enough talk, let's get into game 2. Ethan wins the die roll, but Jason's got his pre-game. He plays Gemstone Caverns, and he exiles Bountiful Promenade. Ethan will then play Spire of Industry into Mox Opal, and then the turn is passed to Matt. Matt will play Snow Forest into Elvish Mystic, then he'll cast Chrome Mox and exile Change of Fortune under it. The turn is then passed, and Jake plays Mana Confluence, then casts his own Chrome Mox, and he puts Resculpt under it. Jake will then lose a life and add a white to cast Esper Sentinel. Jason responds by casting Worldly Tutor. Ethan responds to Worldly Tutor by casting Enlightened Tutor. He'll lose a life for tapping Spire of Industry for white, and Ethan finds Mana Crypt to the top of his library, and Jason finds a Dockside to the top of his. The Esper Sentinel then resolves, the turn is passed to Jason, and he'll play Command Tower, and then cast Dockside Extortionist. It resolves, and he makes 4 treasure tokens. He'll then immediately sacrifice 2 of them to cast Draenith Magistrate. Then he'll pass the turn to Ethan, who plays Wooded Foothills. He'll then cast Mana Crypt, and he does pay for Esper Sentinel. Then he passes to Matt, who starts off with Tinderwall. And then the turn is passed to Jake, who will play Boseiju as land for turn. Then he'll enchant his Mana Confluence with Wild Growth. Then he'll tap his Mana Confluence for green, and he'll cast Birds of Paradise, then pass the turn to Jason. Jason plays Horizon Canopy, and then he'll tap for 2 to cast Survival of the Fittest. He does pay for Esper Sentinel by tapping his Horizon Canopy, and then Jake's not a big fan of this, so when priority gets around to him, he gives Jason an offer he can't refuse. And so it's countered, and now that Jason has more treasures, he'll use all 4 of them to cast Shalai and Hallar. He'll then move to combat and swing for 2 at Ethan, and then he'll pass the turn to Ethan. Ethan stops on end step to fetch for a tapped Blood Crypt. Then on his turn, he wins his Crypt trigger, and then he'll play and fetch with his Windswept Heath for a Tundra. After this, he'll cast Phantasmal Image. It resolves, and he has it enter as a copy of Esper Sentinel, because he needs the cards, he says. He'll then pass the turn to Matt, who plays Mana Vault, and he will pay for both Esper Sentinels, and then he'll pass the turn to Jake. Jake starts off with Sylvan Library, and he does pay for Ethan's Esper Sentinel. Then he passes to Jason, and Jason dashes a Ragavan. Then he'll move to combat and swing for 4 at Ethan, and then 3 in the air at Jake. There are no blocks, so Ethan exiles a Chrome Mox and Jason makes a treasure. Jason declines the Chrome Mox, then he'll play Spire Garden and pass the turn to Ethan, who wins his Crypt trigger again, and then he'll cast Imperial Seal. And he does not pay his taxes. It resolves, so then he'll pick his card, lose 2 life, and then he'll pass the turn to Matt while he shuffles. And Matt starts off with a basic forest. Then he'll just pass the turn, and Jake has a Sylvan Library trigger. He'll pay 8 life to keep 2 extra cards, and then he'll play Gemstone Caverns. Then he'll also just pass the turn, and Jason will crack his Horizon Canopy on instep. Guess what? That monkey's being dashed again. And the attacks are the exact same as last turn. 4 at Ethan, 3 in the air at Jake. Ethan blocks Ragavan this time. And Jake blocks with Birds of Paradise this time, and before damage he'll cast Worldly Tutor with it, and he does pay the 1. It resolves and he finds Devoted Druid to the top of his library. Damage then happens, and then post-combat, Jason will play and fetch with a Flooded Strand for a tapped Temple Garden, then he passes the turn to Ethan. Ethan will stop on instep though to channel Otawara, bouncing Draenith Magistrate. The ability resolves, then Ethan will move to his turn, and he'll cast Dockside Extortionist. It resolves, so Ethan gets 7 treasures. He'll then cast Tymna, and then Kraum. Then he'll move to combat, and with Kraum, he'll hit the guy who just tutored for Devoted Druid. Then post-combat, Ethan will draw a card and lose a life, and then he'll pass the turn to Matt. Matt starts off with the Jeweled Lotus, and he does not pay for Esper Sentinel. Then, with the help of the Lotus, he'll cast Minsc, and Ethan's Kraum will trigger. It'll resolve, and Matt gets his Hamster. Then Matt will sacrifice his Tinderwall, and then tap completely out to cast Green Sun Zenith, X is equal to 7. Jake is first in priority, and he'll respond by Swan Songing it, and it'll be countered. Matt will then move to combat, and hit Jake for 1 with the Hamster. Then post-combat, he'll sacrifice the Hamster to draw a card, and the 1 damage goes to Esper Sentinel. The turn is then passed to Jake, and he'll pay 4 life to Sylvan Library. Then he'll play Tarnished Citadel as land for turn. He'll then cast Thrasios using the Citadel, so he bolts himself. Then he'll sacrifice it to Eldritch Evolution. This does trigger Kraum and Ethan draws a card, but the evolution does resolve. And it finds Dockside Extortionist to the battlefield. Ethan will respond to the ETB trigger, and he'll sacrifice both of his treasures for double blue. And so Jake will get 5 treasures. And he'll use 1 and his Mox to cast Kinnan. He'll then crack one of his treasures for 2 green to cast Devoted Druid, and then he'll sacrifice his last 3 for 2 white, 2 blue, and 2 green. And he'll cast Wargate, X is equal to 1. And he'll still have a blue and a white floating, and then priority goes around the table, and the Wargate resolves. So he finds Swift Reconfiguration to the battlefield, and it attaches to Devoted Druid. And since Devoted Druid is now an artifact and not a creature, it can take as many -1/-1 counters as it wants. So Jake will make a Googleplex of green mana, and with it and his 1 floating blue, he'll recast Thrasios, and then with all that mana, he'll draw his deck. Then all he needs to do is cast Mox Diamond or Lotus Petal to get a blue mana and overload Cyclonic Rift, and then he'll drop Finale of Devastation, X is whatever number he really wants, and swing for lethal at his opponents. If there were any responses, it would have been around when the Wargate was cast, so everybody here is just dead, and Jake wins game 2. Well everyone, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this game of cEDH. It's been a while since we last played one. I know we're not always the best players, so be kind to us in the comments. Speaking of comments, if you enjoyed, be sure to let us know below. And while you're down there, don't forget to check out all of our links. But that's enough for today, guys. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a smooth day.